Hello and welcome back. All this social distancing has given me time to think about one of my favorite topics, the movie monster. And because of this, I wanted to talk about the movement styles and qualities of one of the most iconic movie monsters, the zombies. Zombies are a staple of the horror genre, and they have a long cinematic history, from the racist 1920s and 30s roots all the way to the reimagining into the undead monstrosity we know today. I won't go into that full history today because that's a bit too far out of the scope of this video, and there are more comprehensive resources on that elsewhere. I will link some of those in the description box below. What I do want to talk about are the two types of movement we see in modern zombie films, those being the slow stumblers and the runners. I think a good place to start would be with the movie that started the modern zombie ideal, The Night of the Living Dead.
Welcome to a night of total terror. Night of the living dead, the dead who live on living flesh. The dead whose haunted souls hunt the living whose bodies are the only food for these ungodly creatures. Night of the Living Dead.
In George Romero's 1968 classic, Night of the Living Dead, we see the first incarnation of the slow horde. Their bodies stumble like someone drugged or asleep, and their hands grasp at doors and windows, but their eyes are blank and lifeless. They look like the living, which leaves us, the audience, having to remind ourselves that they are indeed dangerous. Their lethargic and creeping pace gives the illusion to the characters that maybe they could be outrun, but we all know that the danger lingers just behind us or before us. We see the same style of zombies in The Walking Dead, and that interpretation is a bit more grotesque because their slow trudging gives the audience time to witness their decomposition. Some of the most striking moments of the early seasons were the moments when you can spot a walker in the background who is falling apart. They've lost a limb or have a gaping hole in them, yet they continue to walk on. What I find really interesting about the slow zombie is that their movement is fully pedestrian. It stays well within the body's natural limits. They walk at normal, albeit slower paces, but the only unnatural aspect of their movement is that they are literally falling apart. A broken ankle makes them limp, but not stop walking. And I bring this up because other than their speed, this is the largest difference I see between the classic zombie and our next category. In the 2016 South Korean film Train to Busan, we are treated to a terrifying new zombie, the athlete. When these creatures are alerted to prey, they sprint into action and become almost gymnast-like. If one falls, then the others simply crawl over them and create a moving mass of agile bodies. They push, jump, and use each other as springboards. From afar, they kind of look like ants hoarding a piece of food. This incarnation of the zombie pushes further past the body's natural limits because instead of simply stumbling as they fall apart, we see these ones actively breaking bones as they continue to run and jump and even pull themselves, all to get at their prey. Train to Busan utilizes the limits of the human body and then pushes even further into a grotesque manipulation. It's a wonderful thought experiment in what could be done if the body doesn't feel pain and that stops being a barrier. And honestly, this movie is a thrill to watch as a dancer. This rendition to me is a more realistic and scarier version of something seen in movies like World War Z, which I did consider adding into this conversation, but the final product is a CGI nightmare that has only a fleeting relationship to a lifelike representation of the body. And I think the reason that Train to Busan is so successful, other than its solid writing, great characters, and wonderful acting, is that its zombies feel rooted in the physical world, yet move through it in a way that the audience understands they shouldn't be able to. They live on the opposite side of the spectrum that George Romero's sort of uncanny realism does. And the uncanniness of zombies is why I think they haunt us and are so present in our collective consciousness. The Uncanny Valley is a psychological concept that posits that people find non-living objects that resemble humans elicit a borderline fear response. This concept was first introduced in the 1970s by Japanese professor Masashiro Mori during his work with robots. I have noted that in climbing toward the goal of making robots appear human, our affinity for them increases until we come to a valley, which I call the Uncanny Valley. One might say that the prosthetic hand has achieved a degree of resemblance to the human form, perhaps on par with false teeth. However, when we realize that the hand, which at first sight looked real, is in fact artificial, we experience an eerie sensation. This concept has been used to address why things like AI and even creepy dolls give people such knee-jerk reactions. I also believe this is a large reason why the concept of zombies frighten people. They are moving, living almost, but we know that they are dead. They've lost what makes them like us. And I think this comes across the most when they're moving. The uncanniness of the zombie is seen in their lack of pain responses. As an audience, we are primed to physically relate to characters in horror movies. Their pain is our pain, but the zombie doesn't allow for that relation. Most of the time, we actually root for their demise. But the true horror comes from the idea of having to move through their injuries, to be shot or maimed, and to watch what's essentially our own bodies push through that expected pain. That thought experiment I mentioned earlier is the very reason why our brains love and hate the movement of the zombie.